again, this is our new podcast. It's the 4-7 podcast. You're our first guest. We really appreciate it. We know you're super busy. You're actually literally driving right now. And so I've been looking it up. You've been all over the place this fall. California, Texas, Utah, Arizona, Tennessee. What are you currently up to? What's going on?
Well, currently I'm on my way home from Townsend, Tennessee. I was lucky enough to be able to go down and play. Actually, I played a restaurant last night, and today
Nice.
at noon I played like the lunch hour. It's really cool. It's the second time I've played there. Just a cool place, great people that run it. It's called Healthy Vibes in Townsend, Tennessee, and it's just a cool place. Great people. Plus Townsend is beautiful. It's a beautiful place. It's about 20 miles from Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. So it is mountainous. It's great.
Nice.
But I went down there to play. I'm heading back home now, home to Des Moines. It'll take about 13 hours or so. I'm currently passing around the west side of Indianapolis, Indiana, and it's kind of a hard thing because a good friend of mine named Gene Fiesel lives just south of here, and I wasn't able to contact him and get together because normally he'd be like, let's grab some bean. He calls everything to do with coffee bean. He's like, let's grab some bean. And so yeah, he's a musician. He's a pastor of a church. He's been in a band called Fiesel because it was with his two brothers, and then they changed their name to Liptical. But even before that, it was Valiant, which is like an old car, which was really cool. Known him a long time. Anyway, driving around the western side of Indianapolis, thinking about the guys in Fiesel and talking to you guys. And so,
Nice.
yeah, I should be home by 4 a.m. In the morning. So.
Nice. Well, that sounds exciting. I mean, you've been doing a lot of, it looks like acoustic shows over the last couple of months. Is it just you touring? Are you with any part of the band? And how are those shows been going?
No, it's just me right now. Normally on acoustic tours, I'll bring my wife and kids, but with this one being just a whirlwind trip to Tennessee and back, they stayed at home and, they had stuff going already. But my son is actually at a small, I say small because who knows how people are going to react when they're like, he said, what? He's at a birthday party? Don't you know there can only be 8 people? It's another juggle that we have to deal with as musicians, as, families, especially coming up with Thanksgiving and all. But yeah, I've been doing several acoustic shows over the past 2.5 months. Obviously, there's a lot of juggles when it comes to certain regulations and guidelines that everyone is trying to adhere to. They're trying their best to make it safe. But it's been really cool. And when going 5 months without playing shows and touring, which is the longest I've ever gone without touring in 24 years of the band's existence, And so at this moment, I would not take it back for anything. I loved having like a normal at home every night life for 5 months because it was really, really cool. I enjoy my family. But JR and I are working on the new spoken record. JR is also in the band Love and Death, which they have been doing a ton of stuff recently, getting ready for the release of their record. So even if we kind of wanted to do spoken shows right now, there's just really, really good things happening with Love and Death. And so I would never want to get in the way of that. So.
That's awesome. That's great. So that's what you're up to now. Let's kind of dive back a little bit. You just mentioned it. You've been in a band for almost 25 years in spoken. If you can get that far back, how did that opportunity come up? How did you come up with spoken? How did that opportunity arise for you?
Yeah. Well, we had kind of dabbled in music a bit, like in youth group, and for me, I got started with singing in youth choir, and it was something I didn't want to do at all, but I just wanted to skateboard. That's all I cared about. That's how I came to know Jesus, because of skateboarding outside of church. I got invited in. It was during a potluck dinner. I loved every second of it. I thought it was amazing. I wanted to be around those people. They were super kind to me, and they accepted me for just who I was. And they showed me Jesus. They showed me true unconditional love. And so,
now, how old were you when you became a Christian?
14. 14 years old, yeah. February 2nd of 1992.
That is awesome.
Changed everything about my life, And so, we kind of messed around and we played like youth lock-ins and stuff. It wasn't spoken. It was under a different name and different guys or whatever. But we played like 2 songs over and over and over again to a strobe light, like a strobe light just blinding everyone. And that's what we did, We were like, everyone's like, that's really cool, really cool. But one of the songs didn't even have lyrics, So it's like, okay, all right. But we were in a band. And then, like when I was 19 I thought I was going to go to, to do college for real or whatever. And, I had this idea that I was going to try to become a nurse. I'm like, you know what? I can help people this way. I can talk to them about Jesus or whatever. I had given up on music. And I didn't know really what else to do. So, I'm gonna move to Memphis, Tennessee, in with my uncle Benny and my cousins, and I'm gonna go to college in Memphis and whatever. Anyway, I got sick, which I thought I was dying, but it was my first kidney stone. And so I'm like, what? I woke up in the hospital. My uncle's like, well, looks like you got yourself a kidney stone. Go ahead.
I gotta stop you there, hon. How was it passing the first kidney stone?
How was it?
How was it passing that first kidney stone?
Absolutely terrible. Cause I was, I was sleeping on the floor and I was like, man, something is not right. And I literally felt like all of my organs were just done for, right? I'm like, this is terrible. What's going on? So my cousin Daniel took me to the emergency room, and I'm laying there in the floor of the emergency room. For whoever's listening, I'm sorry, I was puking my guts out. Like, I was hurting so bad. I didn't know what was going on. They got me in and they, they gave me some morphine to chill me out a bit. Ended up, waking up the next morning, and my uncle's like, well, looks like you got yourself a kidney stone. I'm like, wait, what? And so I'm like, I can't be, living 6 hours from home and trying to figure out how to get residency to even go to college. Can I even get accepted to college? I don't know, And so I moved back home, and literally, I would say a month later is when, Jeff and I and, Ronnie, BJ, Steven, the original members, we're like, let's play some music. Let's set up in the living room and let's just try to play some songs. And so that's truly when Spoken began. We started playing like people's backyards, their porches, any party that we could play that somebody from, high school was throwing, we were there. But we didn't have a name yet, and we didn't know what to call ourselves. Deftones was already taken because that's like the best name ever created, and at that point we're like, well, I mean, Korn is spelled with a K and a backwards R, works for them. Like, what? Anyway, our drummer, he's like, well, we want to be outspoken about our faith. How about Spoken? We're like, yep, cool. It was a 2-minute conversation, maybe. And so we just started playing more and more shows and recording demos under the name Spoken, and that was kind of it.
Hey Matt, so back in like '97, you've definitely released your first album, On Your Feet. I have a question. So I'm very intrigued by a couple of things with your very first album. First thing, you were on Metro One Records.
Yes.
Now, people don't know Metro One Records. They were part of the Diamante distribution with a whole bunch of different labels. But
yep.
Specifically, Metro One Records, what I like about it is it was there was a lot of different kinds of bands on that label. You had Precious Death, you had you guys, you had Jargonaut, which was the Mortal, which was part of the band Mortal. They released Jargonaut. You had Crystal Lewis, you had K2S back in the day.
Yep.
Tell me about Metro One Records. How did that actually come about? And yeah.
Yeah, we are so far back. Look at this. So we had started sending out, and you know what? Let me say this. There's some store near where I live that's called Diamante, and so every time I drive by it, I think of Diamante. I think of Dirk Lemens from Stavesacre. He used to work at Diamante, And I'm like, what? Every time I think of all of these things from the past, you know. Anyway, we had started recording demos, you know, playing as many shows as possible. We had like 23 songs recorded, and we were sending out, you know, press kits, like in a day of where you would send a manila envelope with a kind of a terrible black and white photo, an 8x10. You would send a cassette tape, you know, you're like a little bio of like, hey, we're nobody, you know, like check it out. Anyway, we were sending stuff to like 5 Minute Walk Records. We sent stuff to Tooth and Nail. We sent stuff to Rescue Records, all this stuff. And anyway, like I remember calling Tooth and Nail, and I talked to someone in the mail room, and I'm like, hey, you know, we had sent in a press kit like a couple months ago. I'm just curious if you guys got it. Like, if we like it, we'll call you. And that was it. That's all I heard. I'm like, okay, cool. All right. So anyway, I ended up talking to a guy from Rescue Records. His name was Noah, and he was like, well, you know, I like what I hear. I like your stuff. The thing is, like, right now we're in the process of launching my son's band. He's in a band, and you know, they have a record coming out. It's called Snuff the Punk. You should check it out. I'm like, oh, I will, absolutely will. And they're like, you know, but I do know of a record label up the coast a little ways in Newport Beach. They're signing, you know, they're wanting to sign some rock bands and bands that are kind of like what you guys are doing. I'll refer you to them. I'm like, thank you so much. Anyway, about, I guess 2 weeks later, I get a call from a guy, and he's like, hey, man, what's going on? This is Tom from Metro One. I'm like, hey, what's going on? And he's like, yeah, well, we like what we hear. We'd love to talk to you guys about, you know, coming out and recording a record. We're like, cool, we'll leave today. He's like, well, no, I mean, you're like, you know, let's plan it out a bit. Three of our guys were still in high school. They were finishing up their senior year, right?
Really?
But I'm like, hey, we'll leave today. We can be there by day after tomorrow. And they're like, well, let's plan on, you know, when did the guys get out of school? I'm like, a month. Like, let's just plan on you guys coming out in a month. Anyway, when I got off the phone with Tom, we counted up our money that we had all together. We had like $147. So we would have made it to like Western Oklahoma. It wouldn't have mattered because we all lived in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and we were just broke. You know, we didn't know, and we didn't know how long we were gonna be broke, or we would have probably rethought some things. But that's how it came about. We went out there and we spent 2.5 days recording On Your Feet. We recorded it live in the studio on 2-inch analog, and we're like, okay, that's it. And so that was that process.
Nice, awesome. You released 3 albums, I think, with Metro One. You were on Your Feet, What Remains, Echoes of the Spirit Still Dwell. Just to give you a little hint of where I came in with you. I became a Christian in high school too, so that was late 90s, and all I'd listened to was like, you know, Jars of Clay, Sonic Flood, you know, DC Talk. I never even knew there was a genre for harder music in the Christian world, and I heard People Get Ready, Jesus is Coming, and wow. I heard you screaming Jesus, you know, just screaming Jesus. And I was like, why is Screaming Jesus the coolest thing I've ever heard in my life? And I just started listening to that, and Echoes of the Spirit Still Dwell was my first album that I picked up. And I was blown away. Like, I didn't know there was a genre of music that could be cool and also Christian at the time. You know, and no hate towards Sonic Flood. You know, at the time, I thought they were amazing too. But it was just a whole nother genre. It opened my eyes. So with saying that, you've come out with music in the CD age, in the Napster age, and now pretty much a fully digital age. What's your favorite era of releasing music, and how has the internet changed your experience?
You know, I liked it when people cared about buying CDs. I enjoyed that. I still buy CDs. Unfortunately, I've had to kind of adapt with the times and buy some stuff, you know, on iTunes and whatever. I don't use Spotify, which is really weird. I don't know why. I've downloaded the app like 10 times, but I love the radio. I love channel surfing while I'm driving. I love stopping on a country station. If I hear, like, you know, Adrian Rogers preaching, I stop on that. I stop on a pop station. I do not stop on Southern gospel. I can't. It just doesn't sit well with my palate. So, but I mean, I want to stay current with music, and I want to hear what people are listening to. And it makes it to where it's like, wow, why is that song on the radio? That is terrible, like, but I've personally written 1,000 awful songs, so I get it. Writing music is a little difficult, like you can have 1,000 ideas and maybe 2 of them are good, so I get that. I understand it. I just don't know how some songs make it on the radio, and I don't understand why some people would buy something that sounds like that. I'm not talking sonically. I'm talking lyrically, like the worst thing ever. The melodies are not good. You just feel uncomfortable with the tone of their voice, stuff like that. And there's plenty of those bands, but I do miss people buying CDs. I miss it being something where they're so excited about walking up to the merch table, buying a physical copy, and sitting there and talking to you about it, just however. But at the same time, I've always been a person who's like, I don't care how people hear it, as long as they can hear it, make a decision if they like it or not. Maybe it will affect their life in a positive way, and maybe it'll make it to where they want to come to a show and we can actually meet them in person, like a real person, not everything online or everything, I don't ever want to be that, untouchable. And I think a lot of bands, unfortunately, they're taught to be untouchable. Where it's like, yeah, just leave some mystery. I'm like, no, I don't agree with that. Like, be a human being, write the best music you can, but be approachable, and let these people who pay your bills, let them know who you are. That's the most important thing, is let them know who you are, and not only about have an idea of who they think you are.
That's awesome. Hey, Matt, I got a question for you. So you guys came out in 97, and now in 97, you had Frontline Records, you had Tooth and Nail, you had Rex Records with, remember, I'm not sure, do you remember 6 Feet Deep, NIV, Dogwood, all those bands from the Southern California area or Arizona?
Yes, let me spend a few moments on that. I loved 6 Feet Deep.
Oh my gosh! I'm so excited. I gotta cut you off right here. I gotta tell you something. Sorry, I might have just put a plosive. Okay, 6 Feet Deep. Sorry, Matt. Oh my gosh, I gotta tell you something.
Do it. Tell me. I want to hear it.
6 Feet Deep is probably one of the most underrated. They're like the godfather of hardcore music in the Christian industry. Mike Porter was an amazing musician. That whole 6 Feet Deep Road Less Traveled album, he wrote and produced every single one and played every instrument on that album. If it wasn't for Rex Records totally folding, I think they could have had an amazing, amazing career.
I absolutely agree. Like, I agree that it was in the same time frame of when bands like Stretch Armstrong was out, and like, you're like, what in the world? Slick Shoes, stuff like that. Strong Arm, I love Strong Arm. All these bands. But yes, I really liked all those bands. Do you remember like Dig Jesus? Do you remember Applehead? Do you remember those bands?
No, I don't. Tell me.
Worth checking out. They were so different from like anything that like I had heard, because in the same way, like, the first cassette tape I ever bought was Inhabit by Living Sacrifice, because I love Slayer. And when I became a Christian, I'm like, okay, what is it? And there's this Christian bookstore in the Northwest Arkansas Mall called Noah's Ark, and they had some cassette tapes of these bands. I'm like, what is this? They had Clank, they had Living Sacrifice. So I bought Inhabit. I'm like, this is so cool. I love it. And like, I didn't realize that Living Sacrifice lived 2.5 hours away in Little Rock. I didn't know.
They're a great band too.
One of my favorite bands of all time. Absolute.
I guess my question I'm getting at is, did you realize at the time, or do you even realize now, that you were part of setting the foundation of great Christian hardcore music that would inspire bands today?
No. It's never been something I really thought about. People tell me that at times. I'm like, well, that's cool, but you know what? Let me tell you about these bands, And whether it be like bands from the past or newer bands. But I remember we went on a youth group trip to Memphis, Tennessee, which is so weird that I'm talking again about Memphis. But we went to Liberty Land. It was like an amusement park. And I remember that we went there, and I don't know, like we were there and they're like, hey, you know who's playing today? We're like, no, who's playing? Audio Adrenaline. I'm like, okay, who's that? You know? And so we watched Audio Adrenaline and it was awesome. And a friend of mine, Jason, which is the guy who invited me to church for the first time ever, Jason Anderson, he got the Headbanger of the Day award, and they gave him a free T-shirt. He was in the front row, and like he was just losing his mind the whole time. And so, you know, while we were there, there was also like we just happened to be in this area where there were a couple bands that were playing in the basement of this church, right? And it was called 407B, I believe is the name of what they called it. But we show up. We watched the bands load in. We're like, okay, who's this? And that night I watched as two bands that I will never forget. They were called Unashamed and Focused.
Oh, that was when Tooth and Nail first started. Great bands.
So good. And Dirk, who played bass for Focused, became the bass player for Stavesacre, another one of my favorite bands of all time. And so, like, I'm standing there watching these bands play, give absolute glory to God, jumping in the crowd, on top of the crowd surfing the thickest guitar tones I'd ever heard in my life. And at that point, I had no clue what guitar tones were. You know, I'm like, oh, okay. Anyway, I mean, that was when I was probably 15 years old. But, you know, that's what started it for me, you know. Yeah. And then when Living Sacrifice released, you know, Reborn, I'm like, this is amazing. What is this? And so there's so many of the bands that I love and I listen to so much. And, you know, to continue on with Dogwood, the other day I was cleaning downstairs and I plugged my phone into my speakers that I have in my music room, my studio, whatever, and I was blasting Dogwood. And so I'm like, I was listening. I didn't realize I had it so loud, and I was absolutely interrupting everything that was going on upstairs with my wife.
This is kids. Why I love the podcast. This is exactly why I started this podcast. I could geek out on this stuff all day.
Well, there's so many great bands, and I sent Josh, the vocalist for Dogwood, a message on Facebook. I'm like, hey man, how's it going? He's like, hey, let's write some music together. I'm like, what? That was last week, and so I'm like, oh, no.
The reason I appreciate you, and specifically you and Josh Kemble of Dogwood, you guys have two faith first bands.
Totally.
Like, it's faith first, because Dogwood, if you listen to their lyrics, like the song Do or Die, when it came to Do or Die, you died for me.
Yep.
Such faith first bands. But I wanted to go back to one thing. So you said Stavesacre. Fun fact, the lead singer of Stavesacre was Mark Selman. He started the band. He was in the band The Blamed back in the day. He released a side project called Outer Circle.
Yep.
Oh my gosh. That CD is probably one of the best one releases ever. That
totally.
CD is intense from start to finish. 28 minutes of in-your-face punk. Oh my gosh.
Did you listen to Neon Horse?
No, I didn't. But he was in that. He started that with was it the Martin Brothers?
I don't know. I think so, but I just remember hearing his voice. I'm like, that's crazy. That's Mark Solomon.
He's got a great, unique voice.
Yep. I remember because it is a very unique voice, and it takes a little bit to be like, okay, how do I feel about this? Like, it's so different, right? And that's one of the things that's so shocking about it. It is so different. And I remember vividly the night that I fell in love with Stavesacre. I was driving through the desert. I was in Eastern California listening to Absolutes on cassette, and I'm like, I love this. I love this. I love this. It was so cool. I love it.
That's awesome. That's awesome. You kind of mentioned it while you were talking right there. You know, in a past interview, you had mentioned my band isn't my ministry. My whole life is my ministry. And you mentioned anything that's involved around your life that you're involved in, that's your ministry. Can you expand more on that? Your experience in the last almost 25 years in spoken, you know, how do you view that with faith in your music?
Yeah, you know what's crazy? How long it took me to realize that spoken was my ministry. Okay, that's what I always say. I would be like, yeah, my ministry. I'm in a band called Spoken. It's my ministry, my ministry, and it was a hard lesson learned, but I had to realize that it's not only the band that makes it to where I can communicate the gospel, you know, and so that was one of the things that was hard, and I can't believe that for so many years I just looked at it as Spoken was my only ministry, because it should be every aspect of your day. You're not going to get it right all the time. I don't get it right half the time, you know, but the ministry to my children and to my wife and to people that I come in contact with, that's more important than music. That's more important than me traveling and being on a stage and saying stuff, because at the absolute end of the day, I don't deserve to be able to be in a band. I don't deserve to be able to travel as an acoustic artist. I don't deserve to be able to do guest worship at a church. I don't deserve how great my wife is and how amazing my kids are. It's absolute the grace of Jesus. And so I don't want to mess it up. I don't want to miss those opportunities, because I know how often I have missed opportunities by letting things that are not as important be too important.
Amen to that. I have a question for you. It's definitely along the faith side. I'm a small business owner, and one of the biggest things I struggle with is success. Like, when am I going to be successful? What is success? From a world standpoint, success could mean a money value. From a faith standpoint, it's a very different thing. So back in the day, I was listening to an article about, remember Everyday Life, or EDL?
Yes, I do, Ted.
Oh my gosh, their second album, American Standard, holy crap, that was just one of those, again, in-your-face records. But yep. I remember when they were releasing their third album, they were very discouraged because POD was getting popular. Project 86 just went from Tooth and Nail, Beck Records to Atlantic Records in the new metal scene, but they were having a hard time feeling successful because they weren't getting as far as they wanted.
Yeah.
What is success? Have you struggled with that? What is success to you? Have you ever been through that process of, am I successful enough?
I would say, yeah. I would say anybody who works really, really hard to try to make it to where your music is heard, to make it to where your band is noticed, to where people are excited to check out your band. I do remember when Project 86 came out. I remember how they skyrocketed. Like, it was insane. Like, I'm like, we're like the same kind of music. Like, what's going on? You know, but their record was great. Like, their first record was great. To me, like, Drawing Black Lines, incredible. What's it? Rival Fractions, whatever. Yep. Rival Fractions. Love that record. Like, I'm a fan, you know, and I always have been. It was a little bit. We probably had a conversation as a band, being like, this band just literally sold like 400,000 records, and we're trying to sell 20,000 records, and that's when bands could sell records. But then I'm like, you know what? That's great that they're doing that, because it's only helping build what it is that the rest of us are trying to do. And I think that, you know, in the same way when Norma Jean came out and they blew up enormous, like, that was something that was great for the Christian music industry. When Under Oath came out with They're Only Chasing Safety, that changed everything for bands like us, because bands that didn't have faith or didn't care about the Christian market, they took notice, and they're like, wait, there are bands that sound like this, that are this good, that can hang with these other bands. Like, no matter how we feel about, you know, a band now, back 15, 20 years ago, they helped define what it is that we're able to do now. And so, and it is a very different world. And there are some bands that, you know, I mean, honestly, I won't mention names, but anybody who can think for a minute, or maybe they've been to shows and they've met some of these bands, they're like, wow, those guys were jerks. You know, we're like, it's something where they miss the fact that, like, you're lucky to be able to do this. You're lucky to be able to play music at all. You're lucky that God allows you to breathe today. So why is it that you would ever act like you're too good for the person who paid a ticket to be at your show? And
just
they
thought
give
of
you
one.
This success. Yeah, well, I can think of 50, right now. Every time I scroll through my phone, I see some names where I'm like, ugh, I just need to delete that,
Yeah,
But and it doesn't matter if you're just considered a concert goer. It doesn't matter if you're the promoter who is paying money to bring this band in. It doesn't matter if you're the people who are helping load this band in to make it possible for them to play this show that they're getting paid well to do. It should be something where every person is treated with respect. That should be it. And none of us deserve to be able to do anything when it comes to being able to tour, whether you're in a van, whether you're in a car, whether you're on a bus, it doesn't matter. You are very fortunate. And if you want to use the word blessed beyond reason to do it, that's awesome. I'm happy that bands blow up huge. I'm happy that bands are able to make a good living at doing it. If they can sell tickets like that, fill these places up and make it to where every promoter on earth doesn't lose money, by all means, I'm all about it. Like, if you can tell people something that points them towards Jesus, I am all about it.
You just put chills up my spine right there, my friend. That is absolutely amazing. I love the fact that you don't really care how successful you are. You just care about people hearing the word of Jesus.
I do. I know that God's going to take care of everything. He always has. There's been no reason that we've been able to afford to even put gas in the gas tank for 24 years of touring. No reason. Like, it's like, okay, this is awesome. So glad we get to do this. Does that mean that there are not hard days where you're kind of like, is it worth it? Like, I don't know. And then every time, like, you get to a show that night and you play and you have some kind of conversation, like, absolutely it was worth it. That was so cool. Wow, being broken down on the interstate all day long, it was worth it. It was fun.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, you have been playing for 24 years. You've come out with 9 albums as Spoken. I think one as yourself with the worship album on the side. It's really awesome to see that God has sustained that success for so long for you guys. Last question I'll get into with your older music. You obviously changed a lot from your first 3 albums onto your next 3 albums with Tooth and Nail. Is there a specific song that sticks out to you in your first 3 albums that you still appreciate a lot in those 3 albums?
I don't know. I don't listen to our records, which I get grief about all the time. Like, what do you mean?
Really?
You don't listen to it? I was like, well,
that is crazy.
I don't know. I was there, I helped write it. We performed each record, which means I probably heard each song 300 times, while we played it live. And so it's like, if I play it live, I hear it. That's fine. But one of the things that someone recently challenged me with is like, why don't you go back and listen to your whole discography? I'm like, I don't have time. They're like, you drive a lot. I'm like, I get it, but I don't really like listening to what they're like. Go back and listen to what the songs were about then, and see what you learned about yourself after that. See where you are now. See the things that you can, listen to then. It's like, oh, totally. Yep. I remember that. I was like, there's a lot of things about the past of band member stuff that I don't want to remember. I don't want to go back and do that. I've had people be like, you should write a book. I'm like, I don't think so. And they're like, no, the history of the band. I'm like, there's just history that I don't want to remember. I don't want to relive. And there are things that went on that I don't want it to be where these past band members have to hear a story about why they're no longer in the band. They know why they're not in the band. And I don't want it to be something where I would ever, be dragging someone, down by hearing their story 20 years later, because some departures were not good departures. And that's absolutely unfortunate. There are some departures that were amazing, and I, talk to those guys often on the phone. But I think anytime that a part of history is kind of uncovered and dug up again, it's kind of a bummer.
Mm-hmm.
I got a question for you, Matt. So when you guys signed to Tooth and Nail Records, now Tooth and Nail Records, just to be, they have a little bit of a controversial past as far as who they've signed and things of that nature. Was it an easy decision to sign to Tooth and Nail Records? Like, what was your thought process behind that?
I don't know if it was an easy decision. I know that every band when they first started, whenever that was, they're like, I want to be on Tooth and Nail. Of course, yeah. I wanted to be on Tooth and Nail until I heard from their news or their mail rooms like, yeah, if we like it, we'll call. Like, okay, you know. But we worked really, really hard touring on the Metro One records, and once we were out of our deal with that, you know, we kept touring nonstop, trying to write music, trying to tour, trying to juggle all that stuff. But you know, we were talking to Goatee Records for a very long time. You know, even before we started talking to Tooth and Nail. But then, like, it became something where we were talking to Goatee and Tooth and Nail at the same time. And, you know, that was right when it basically is like you had Relient K, that was one of the biggest bands on Goatee. And we're like, that's really cool. They have so many, you know, people who love their band and follow their band. You know, it's only a matter of time until they blow up, right? They were already huge in the Christian market, but they hadn't really been marketed to general market yet. But then when you have Tooth and Nail, Under Oath was blowing up enormous. I'm like, well, that's already like blowing the doors wide open for general market. And we wanted to be able to tour both markets because we were already playing bars and churches. Like it was like half and half all the time. We're like, we'll play anywhere. Like we would just like, we just want to play. And so we made the decision, like, you know what, there is this general market possibility, you know, with Tooth and Nail. So let's do that. And so we signed a Tooth and Nail, and, you know, we're in the process of recording the record. And right then is when Relient K blew up and they were like on Warped Tour, you know, so it's like both of those would have been great options. But, you know, we recorded A Moment of Imperfect Clarity, and we were able, that was a whole new chapter for us, you know? And so we took off on the road. And so we did all 3 records on Tooth and Nail. And, you know, we figured, it's like, once we were done with our contract with Tooth and Nail, I was like, well, we did 3 on Metro One, 3 on Tooth and Nail. Let's see what else is going on. And that was that long period between Tooth and Nail and E1, which we also had several new band members and trying to figure out, all right, if we put out a record, it's got to matter. What are we doing? And so that's when we literally spent so much time and like touring the whole time, you know, but also learning more about songwriting, because we had never really been taught any of that in the beginning. We just took off on the road as some teenagers. So we learned a whole lot midway through our career about songwriting. And I think that was awesome. But then, you know, right after, you know, we recorded Illusion, that's right before that record came out, we were able to go out with, you know, the band Volbeat. And that was a whole other world for us. You know, being able to play, you know, anywhere between 2,500 people and 6,000 people every night for 6 weeks. And I'd never even heard of that band until we were on tour with them. That was crazy. But that was just a whole other, like a springboard, you know, to be able to continue having a band, being in a band. Like that added so much to the longevity of our band. So even, you know, that far in, we had a great opportunity with a really big band that agreed to take us on the road.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Your music, as you just said, is growing album after album. Your first 3 albums, the big change in A Moment of Imperfect Clarity, and then the slight changes that happened after that, you know, all the way up until 9. You know, right now you just released 4 singles that I've noticed on Spotify: Nightmare, Awaken Me, Fallen, The Way Back Home. Nightmare blew me away. Very piano driven, a lot different than the normal album that you'd have. Tell me a little bit about that song, Nightmare. How did you come up with that? What is that really about there?
Well, I mean, Nightmare is a song that, there's a band called Righteous Vendetta that we had toured with several times. Anyway, Justin, their guitar player, he and I, we ended up recording, like, I think we demoed like 5 or 6 songs a few years ago. And Nightmare was quite a bit heavier song. Like it was pretty heavy. Anyway, I showed it to JR, and he was like, "This is cool. I have an idea." I'm like, "Go for it. Whatever you want to do." Right. And he sent me this demo that was not really a demo. It sounded like a record, you know, and it was him singing the whole song. And it was all down and ballady and piano driven. I'm like, this is so cool. He's like, well, I just kind of, seemed like it would fit good as a piano song. I'm like, I love it. And literally, like, I wasn't in a situation to be able to record vocals on it yet, and so I literally was almost I was about to where like, JR, let's just put it out with you singing the whole thing, and he's like, wait, what? I'm like, dude, it's really good. And you know, in the end, it's kind of one of those things where it's like, okay, you know, like it's already one of those things where it's like it is different that JR's in the band. People are excited about it. It probably just shouldn't be right off the bat. There's JR singing a whole song, or people think that I'm just straight up being phased out, you know, which maybe, I don't know. But you know, ended up recording, you know, some vocals, and JR mixed it together, and I'm like, yep, this is cool. This is cool. Because JR, I mean, man, he's one of my favorite vocalists. Like, he's just really good. He's definitely one of my favorite guitar players. He's one of my favorite songwriters. Great stage performer, and he's just a great guy. So I'm kind of like, yeah, for sure. I dig it. Let's do it. And so that's, you know, it's one of those things where, like, we were talking about everything to do with COVID and how everyone is so confused. What a nightmare. And, you know, we're just like, this is the perfect song for right now.
You know, Matt, I got a question for you. So, as I stated before, one of my favorite things about your band and bands like Disciple, Skillet, I find the band's very missional, whether it be through their music or actually with action, either on the road or in person with their fans. I find your music, I find Disciples' music, specifically both of your music, very missional with your words. Like, you write with a purpose. It's your ministry. But as I've noticed over the past few years, have you noticed that the Christian rock, metal, hardcore scene has really changed to more self-serving, or do you still see it as a ministry for most bands?
I think it depends on the band, really. I think it's because, I mean, bands don't realize that most of their fans can see right through them, you know, where it's like, but at the same time, I think so often these bands and band members or whatever it is, they are put on such a high pedestal that people kind of ignore their bad attitude, or they ignore some of the things that they post on social media. And I was like, I don't know, because in the end, I don't want to do anything that, you know, my wife and my kids would be like, wait, what are you doing? I want to do what honors them as well, you know, and I just think it's really hard. I think human beings are hard. I think the way people react to situations is really difficult. And I get it. Like, we live in a very strange, upside down, broken, crazy world, especially this year, you know? And so I think a lot of times bands do get hung up on, you know, what can they do? How can they say something? How can they say it to make it to where the rest of the world embraces it? Instead of just kind of like, hey, what's on your heart? What's truly going on inside your heart? How do you write about that? You know, because, I mean, straight up, I was talking about it today. I did this acoustic thing, you know, at this restaurant during the lunch hour or whatever. And I spoke a little bit about how there are certain songs that I hear on country radio that I think are so good, but there's like one line in it that I would never say, therefore I'm never going to sing it, you know? And so you automatically be like, I'm never going to cover that song because of one line. Yeah. And unfortunately, I think that there are things that people put into songs where they're like, I don't want anyone to be confused about what this song's about. Therefore, I'm going to put this one line in to make it blatant, you know, so there's no doubt. I'm like, okay, well, that's fine. Because there are plenty of songs that I, you know, straight up wrote about my life that people are like, man, that just touches my spirit. Like, that just brings me closer to God. And I'm like, that's awesome, because that's what's so great about music. It is open to interpretation, you know? And so I'm like, that's awesome. But sometimes they're not too stoked to hear that it's like, oh, actually, that song's straight up about my wife, about how I feel about my wife. But in the end, it's one of those things, like, if a person can relate to, and they can relate that affection that I feel for my wife and that love I feel for my wife, but they like, this is how I feel about Jesus, that's great. That's fine. Because I'm sure there's a lot of songs that came out on a worship record that were originally written, you know, about how someone felt about a loved one.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. The one thing as you were talking about, there's, you know, the way you write, and there's things that it might be just that one line that kind of totally just ruins the song. I'm thinking about a couple bands. I don't want to say them out loud right now, but There's been a couple of bands in the Christian market who have literally dropped an F-bomb in their songs or cursed in their songs. And I think to myself, why? Why do you think sometimes Christians feel the need, especially in their music, to feel relevant?
I want to say I don't know, but I feel like people who decide to put those words in a song, I believe that those words are common in their everyday speech. Therefore, they're kind of like, no big deal.
Very true, very true.
I believe that's probably it. But I've also had the conversation about, cuss words so many times because people that was like, do you ever just want to cuss in a song? I'm like, nah. I was like, I think I could find a different word that I could scream at the top of my lungs that can show that I'm feeling pretty aggressive. I don't think it has to be one of those words. I'm like, I would never say it in everyday life. Why would I ever put it into a song that's recorded and forever? It's forever, on YouTube or recorded or any digital platform. I wouldn't do that. I don't want to do it. And I understand that bands have the freedom to say what they want. That doesn't mean I have to understand it. I don't. I have a lot of friends that they cuss like sailors, and I don't. That doesn't mean I can't be friends with them. There are a lot of things about them that I'm like, I don't understand that aspect. And I know that there are things about me that probably drive people insane. But they're still my friends.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I mean, don't know. I don't know why anybody would cuss in a song ever. That's just me. So
I totally hear that. And I feel like there's been a progression of Christian artists that have started to do that, more and more. And I think, and I'll point this out because it's positive for me. I won't point out all the negative times it's happened. But the one time that I heard it happen and I was almost okay with it was King's Kaleidoscope. If you have heard their song Prayer. Ridiculous song. So if you have time to go check them out, they're amazing. But
I want to say I heard that song recently. Like I don't know why, but
they dropped the F-bomb, and it was not my choice to do, but hearing King's Kaleidoscope and all of their music discography, like it's ridiculous. But we don't want to keep you too much longer, so we only have a couple more questions for you. But you talked about your family earlier. You said your family tours with you sometimes. How do you take care of your family and your marriage, more importantly, during like these touring times when you're gone for quite a bit?
I would say I'm constantly trying to figure it out, because because I'm not in the room seeing everything that's going on or seeing conversations that are being had with our kids or who's sending my wife text messages about what is it that my wife is having to deal with at home while I'm 1,000 miles away. And the same way, if she's not talking to me, she doesn't know what I'm dealing with. Am I on the side of the road changing a tire? Am I? You never know, because life goes on, even apart, right? So like sometimes it's kind of a juggle, because I'm pretty good at I'm pretty good at not letting my priorities be my priorities all the time. And that's kind of hard, especially at a spot where it's like, okay, got a sound check. Sound check's running late. What's going on with this PA system? Why is this guy the guy running sound? He has no clue what's going on. What is he doing? Things run late. Things are stressful, whatever. And missing a call from my wife is one of my least favorite things on earth. I want to answer it. I want to see what's going on. I want to know what's going on at home. Having bad phone service is one of the worst things ever. Like whether it be in the States, whether it be when we're in Europe, it drives me crazy. Like it's so hard. But my wife is absolutely amazing, and I don't know how she does everything that she does. I don't know how she keeps things kind of on track the way she does. And she's been very, very patient with me over the years, be continuing to learn of like, what do I need to be doing? How do I become a better father? How to become a better husband? How am I a better friend? Because in that all too, I want to be a better band member, to the guys in the band. I want to be a better communicator, all of that, and so I think if every person can realize that we are absolute works in progress, and as long as we're trying our best to move forward, I think we're all in a good spot as long as we're trying. But, a mentor of mine and my wife's, that something that he said to us early on in our marriage was that if you're not nurturing your relationship, it's dying. And I'm like, what? He's like, basically, if you chose to buy a potted plant and then you chose not to water it, you're choosing to kill it. I'm like, that's amazing, And so it's one of those things where I think there are little moments that you have a reminder of like, okay, are we moving forward? If we're not, why not? What do we need to do? How do we do this? But I think any job that requires you being gone is really hard. When it's already like, just life has enough things that we have to try to juggle. And that's not even taking into consideration, finances, distance, phone service, meltdown with children, whatever it could possibly be. We all have these things that we are trying to juggle. And I love the journey. I really do. I mean, that doesn't mean that there's not hard situations, but we figure it out. And again, my wife is a saint. That's it. I'm not. She is. So.
You sound just like me. I tell my wife, I'm like, man, I married up, first of all. And second of all, I'm sorry, and you're amazing. So I respect.
Yeah. I was like, I listened to a podcast yesterday of this a gentleman who he's a middle school a middle school leader, and he was like, basically, guys are boneheads and our wives are who they give us these ideas and we're like, oh yeah, I should do that. He's like, but we're just boneheads. And I'm like,
absolutely.
So true. So true.
My wife is an absolute amazing person. I always say if my wife was an animal, she'd be a fox, but that's just me hitting on her. But anyway, so my wife, when I see her serve in church, I'm not going to lie, this past couple of years, I've been a little bit slacking and learning different things about how to balance, like kind of what you just said, how do you balance life? How do you balance success? But at the same time, be a good husband and be the father and the husband that God called you to be. Over the past couple of weeks, couple of months, I mean, I see my wife, I see her serving and getting involved, and it's totally inspired me to be like, I need to be that husband she needs to be, that she needs.
Yep.
I need to be that father because, every day I tell my kids this verse. It's in Matthew. It says, for Christ did not come to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many. That also means we should be serving our wife. How do we serve our wife every day? Like, if Christ died for us, and the Bible says, love your wife like you love your church. Yeah. What are we doing? What legacy are we leaving for our kids? Because if we're not giving a good legacy for our kids, then we're pretty much throwing our kids to the wolves.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm absolutely so guilty. So many times where I'm like, man, I was not the best example I could have been right then, and it is, kids are always watching, and that means we're always teaching. But look at how often we absolutely forget that. And the same way, like, I mean, the world is watching all of us at all times. And I think so often people forget that, especially bands, bands that consider themselves Christian bands, because people are just waiting. They're waiting and they're hoping that they see you, fall flat of your face.
Absolutely.
And it's a really kind of a hard thing because you're a fish in a fishbowl all the time, and so it's like, if you looked at it as like, okay, work, yep, you're always on the clock then, because they're watching every move you make.
Yeah.
It's the same, with your children. And I have some good kids, and I've apologized to my mom several times about how my brother and I were when we were growing up. I'm like, hey, I'm sorry. It's like, oh, you were good boys. I'm like, I don't think so.
So along with that, along with all this, I have a question for you. What is God teaching you now? Like, what are you going through? Like, what is the one thing that you say, something, God is really leading me through this right now, and because he's leading me through this, I'm growing, I'm learning.
Well, it's a conversation that I actually had this morning with God while driving along, side this river in Townsend, Tennessee, as the fog was lifting off the fields and through the trees. I'm like, God, you're so cool. You're so creative, and a lot of times, like I'll just talk to Jesus in my head, because I have this thought. I'm like, I don't want Satan to know what I'm talking to God about. You know what? And it's like, it doesn't matter because he has zero power anyway. And I'm talking to my Savior. I'm talking to the creator of the universe. He's almighty. He's powerful. It doesn't matter what Satan has to say about anything. And so today I was driving along this river and I was talking to God just out loud. I'm like, God, I want to talk to you more. I want to be better friends with you. Like I want it to be something where it's like I'm not concerned about talking to you out loud because you deserve it, and that was this morning. And so I think it's somewhere it's like, God, I know God's going to take care of everything, and God knows every aspect of what all of us are dealing with right now with the pandemic and COVID and all this uncertainty. And so it's like, why can't I talk to my King out loud? And so it was really weird to me. It's like a revelation where I'm like, yes, I'm going to talk to my Father out loud and not just in my head, because I feel like so often that all the things swirling around in my head are louder than my own voice, and I think that's something that I would say a lot of people struggle with, especially when it comes to self-doubt or when it comes to, us beating ourselves up way too much. Our voice is normally the loudest one in our head. And so I don't want to do that. I don't want to be that. I want to move forward, in all relationships, especially, with my wife, with my kids, and with Jesus.
That's awesome. We've talked a lot about your old music, and we're going to wrap up now kind of with the future here. So if you want to kind of end the conversation with what are your plans for the upcoming couple months here? You have a new album, I think, that you're preparing. Anything you want to talk about with what's coming up?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've got a run of acoustic shows out to California and back. Obviously, all of those could cancel tomorrow. Who knows what's going on with everything to do with regulations and guidelines, but I'm pretty excited about it. I've been in the past, week or so writing some more as far as like acoustic stuff. Just trying to finish some ideas of songs for like a second worship album. So there's been that. JR and I had a conversation yesterday about the spoken record of us, continuing to write over the next couple of months and to try to have a record complete, like fully written, 10 songs by February. And then, like right now we've got some shows booked for July, but it's really hard to kind of move forward with filling those in because I don't know if they're going to happen. But us finishing a spoken record and, honestly being excited and being patient about the Love and Death record coming out because it's so good, and I'm excited about it. So all of those things, and spending time with Tiffany and the boys and just kind of preparing for, a little more time together before, the new year. So that's kind of what we're up to, but a lot of writing, trying to just kind of always stay in writing mode, whether it be for my own stuff, for spoken, maybe helping other artists write a chorus here and there and just kind of demo it out. But yeah, I think just being able to hang out with Tiffany and the boys is probably what I'm stoked about it. I enjoy it.
That's awesome. Hey, thank you so much for taking your time to speak to us. I know you're busy and you're driving and all of that, but you've been really cool to take your time out and spend some time with us. Just like you did back in February. Like you said, you are one of those bands that you're approachable and you're willing to speak to people. You're willing to speak to me. Just the oldest dude in the room to talk to me. By far, it was just me and like a bunch of 18-year-olds, but it was a great time, and we thank you again for coming on. If you don't mind, we'll end the recording and then just kind of wrap up, and that's it.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much.